Hey guys, this is Robert Breedlove, and welcome to episode 2 of the Sailor series on the What is Money show. So, in episode 1, we covered the rise of man through the Stone and the Iron Ages. So, we went into ancient technologies. We talked about fire, we talked about missiles, and we talked about hydraulics facilitated by water. And now, in this episode, we're going to go a little further in the historic arc of man, and we're going to get into the Dark Ages. We're going to learn how missing one key step along the path of civilization can actually cause us to slide backwards and to regress, and that civilization is not a guarantee, right? It is something that must be continually pushed forward and maintained across time. And we'll also get into how humanity re-emerged from the Dark Ages ultimately into the Industrial Age and the Steel Age, which enabled a lot of very important technologies like cities and aviation and railroads, things of this sort. So we're going to touch on, again, the benefits that are offered by standardization and also the benefits of protocols, similar to the ones we talked about in ancient Roman times earlier, and how the economic benefits of these standardizations to one language or one protocol actually accrete to civilization. So these cost efficiencies accrete to us in the form of being able to satisfy wants faster, cheaper, and better. And that's actually the force that drives civilization and increases both economic and network density for mankind. We're also going to talk about how violence and monopolization have shaped the course of history, how violence has been used to extract rents and taxes, how gatekeepers have influenced the course of history, and how monopolies have developed in both a natural and an unnatural way. And then we'll also talk about packaged foods and how much of an influence that had on civilization, enabling us to store energy in a leak-proof container, and also how mankind's ability to eradicate some infectious diseases was such a huge boon to humanity in terms of increasing life expectancy and quality of life overall. And again, the general aim of this is to construct a solid intellectual foundation on which to understand the profound impact that we believe Bitcoin will have on the world. And you can think about Bitcoin, as Saylor refers to it, as an engineering breakthrough, and that for the first time in history, we have a technology that is able to store the energetic life force that money represents. Again, we can think of money as a claim on all other sources of energy in the world, right? Whether it's capital, chemical energy, kinetic energy, food energy, all these types of energy. Money acts as a kind of meta energy. And we've never had a monetary technology that was totally leak-proof and that it did not lose value over time. So hopefully by drawing analogies to these very important innovations across history, you'll start to have an emerging realization of the real importance and significance of Bitcoin. So with that, let's jump into episode 2, and at the end of this, I'll do a little outro to hopefully synthesize some of these ideas. All right, thanks.
We have the rise of man through the Stone Age, and it took quite a long time, but we got here. That's impressive. We have the Roman rise, and we saw a sophisticated society mastering energy networks, logistics networks, advanced tools, political processes, in order to dominate their sphere of influence. And by the age of the Antonines, around Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius. Those are like 100 years. It's a golden age of Rome. And that's like 90 AD to 180 AD. The average life expectancy of a Roman is 72. And so if you've got baths, you've got writing, you've got civilization, you've got sanitation, you've got aqueducts, you've got roads. They've got stuff pretty well organized, some sophisticated machines. And then, of course, we take a hard left turn into the Dark Ages, and stuff just starts to break down. And it's a reminder that that nothing is certain. If you miss a key insight, you could waste 1,000 years. And stuff could have happened a different way. It didn't. For example, let's take the printing press. The Chinese developed printing presses way back 2,000 years ago. They never really thought to commercialize them. And the Chinese alphabet is a pictographic alphabet. And so you would have needed 25,000 different type pieces in order to have like movable type in a printing press. And so they had the wrong language to develop printing presses. The Romans had the Roman alphabet, which is an ideal language because you could actually print anything with just like 26 or 50 pieces of movable type. And they had all the knowledge, but for some reason, they just anybody could have figured it out, Robert. Like, all you got to do is walk in your boots through the mud and step on a nice floor and look down. And there's the idea for a printing press.
Yeah.
Tracks in the mud, right? They had paint, they had dyes, and you know they're just so close, and then they don't hit it. And we wait until whatever 1453 or something for Gutenberg to work this out, and we're going to suffer for 1,000 years. It's amazing to me how certain things can be just right in front of a civilization, and they just won't grab them. Like, if you go to St. Peter's Square, to the Vatican, and you look at that column, I think that used to be, it's now St. Peter's column, but it used to be Trajan's column. And Trajan's column was put up, on the, to celebrate the triumph of Trajan and his wars. And it's a bas relief, a marble relief of the Dacian Wars. And it spirals up the column, had a little staircase in the middle of it, a work of art and architecture. And at the top, eventually the Roman Catholics put the statue of St. Peter, I guess. And in the ancient Roman times, that had Trajan's statue on it. And Trajan is standing there in his imperial robes, and he's holding his hand up in the air. And do you know what he's holding in his hand?
I don't know.
He's holding the world, and it's round, Robert. He's holding the globe in his hand, and this is 100 AD. Fast forward 1,400 years, and people think the world is flat. It's like the Romans knew the world was not flat.
Right.
And if they hadn't ripped his statue off the column 1,000 years earlier, or whenever they ripped it off and buried it somewhere, they would have known the world was round. And it's so ironic that you could learn and then forget such a basic thing.
Right, right. So there is the possibility of significant civilizational regression if we ignore those learnings that we've accumulated over time.
And you can go backwards, and you think, well, we got it. And if we do this, we're going to leap forward into a new progressive era. But if we kill it at a pivotal point, maybe people forget it ever existed, like letting that fire go out.
Yeah.
I'll tell you another one that blows my mind. If you go to the Museum of the Native American Indian or Native American in Washington, D.C., and you walk around, you see there's an entire civilization. I mean, they're pretty much hunter-gatherers. And if you want to understand how hunter-gatherers lived, I mean, the American and Native Americans, the way they were when the Europeans showed up in America, is probably your best proxy for what the Paleolithic man was, I guess. But amongst all the artifacts they gather, if you walk around, you eventually find a pottery wheel. And the pottery wheel, it's a wheel in stone, and it's got a beautiful piece of pottery. And the sign says, glowingly, Native Americans had very sophisticated pottery, and they knew how to mold clay, and they used this pottery wheel to do it. And I look at the wheel, and I think, for 5,000 years, nobody in the entire continent thought to take the wheel and turn it this way and roll it.
Right.
Like, they knew a wheel. They knew a wheel was useful.
Yeah.
I give you the wheel, Robert, but they never invented the wheelbarrow. They never invented the wagon. There's no rolling stock anywhere in America.
Incredible.
And, and so you're like, think about the consequences of that insight. Like, how is it possible that not a single person in the entire continent ever thought they might want to turn the wheel this way up?
Right.
But it's such a profound idea.
Right.
And yet you can go 1,000 years and not get that idea.
Do you think there's any modern examples that jump to mind, that's something that's maybe glaring at us in the modern age that we're ignoring, or something that maybe we've forgotten or we're no longer respecting?
Well, Robert, the blockchain and Bitcoin is a wheel. It's I can use this stuff if I turn it this way, It's I take a couple of, they're not complicated ideas, public, pretty good privacy, private key encryption, hashing,
right?
Like, no one of them on its own. I mean, they've all been sitting there, and someone says, well, what if I just do that with it? And I start this fire, and I rub two sticks together, or maybe I just never think to rub two sticks together.
This calls to mind your example of the Roman hierarchy as well, that because everyone knew they were being watched, right? It maximized their accountability and therefore their performance and competence. And the Bitcoin network's sort of the same. You have all the nodes and miners looking at one another's activity to make sure everything's above board all the time, right? It's instantly auditing itself constantly in real time.
And you could say, right, the Romans were healthy as long as they kept tension and dynamism and this incredible competition in their ecosystem. And when they lost it, they lost their edge. Right. And then, when you look at the classic guns, germs, and steel type narratives, like the Europeans, they got hardened and tougher because they were always fighting with each other, and living with your animals made you tougher, and having people come through from Asia made you tougher. And, and as soon as you try to insulate yourself from those stressors,
right,
then your civilization forgets how to do things, or never figures it out.
Right. Taleb calls the stressors are the information, right? So you're actually cutting yourself off from the information flow that's driving your adaptation. So, yeah.
So one way or the other, we meander through that, but it strikes me that it didn't have to last as long as it did. Life expectancy plunges down to 30 years from 72 years. And wow. And in a world without technology, if you don't have aqueducts and sanitation and rules, like, don't bring your horse into the middle of the village because he's going to crap all over everything and going to get sick, right? In the absence of all those orderly rules, then you you have just a degradation of the human condition. And we started to crawl out with the Renaissance, and what's interesting there, I think, is if you look at all the great cities in the world, all the great cities grew as nexus, as the central node of an empire. So Rome was the nexus of an empire. Carthage was the nexus of an empire. When they lose their empire, they collapse. The only way you generate enough money to make a great city is you have to scrape a tax off of all the energy, all the commercial value in a large place. A fisherman cast a wide net to capture the fish. That's your empire. The Roman shtick was, pay us 10% when it comes into Rome and 10% when it goes into the next port, and we'll take 20% of the value added, or maybe 30%, or whatever we're going to take, right? If you go into Venice and you look around the Grand Canal, you see all these palazzos. They're all just warehouses. I bring a ship into Venice, I offload my cargo, and then it goes out the back and it gets barged up and down the canal, and it gets transshipped to a new ship. In that world, each ship ran this route. Venice to Alexandria was one trade route. Venice to Rome is another trade route. Venice to Istanbul is another trade route. You're at the nexus. You're running these shipping networks. And of course, you got to bribe the guy in Istanbul, or maybe, your son marries his daughter, and that's how you get to come in and out of Istanbul without getting murdered or getting your stuff stolen. And eventually all the families in Venice intermarry. Like, I know you, you're my second cousin. That's how we don't cheat each other. Mm-hmm. And there's no way, you can't solve the traveling salesman problem. There's no way I can take a ship from Istanbul to Alexandria to Venice to Rome, to Ibiza or wherever I would go, right? Barcelona, right? Because I would basically get overtaxed or extorted in each port unless I actually was, friendly, right?
Right.
So the way that works is you have a hub and spoke system, and there's always one central city, and there's always one set of families or companies, and they intermarry, and they trust each other, and they just agree, I'm going to buy wheat for a nickel or for a dime in Alexandria. I'm going to bring it to Venice, and I'm going to sell it to you for 50 cents. You're going to take it to Barcelona and sell it for $1. And you're going to pay a nickel in tax to the guy on the other end. You're going to get your 45 cents. I'm going to get my 45 cents. Those guys paid $1. These guys got paid a nickel. We can play with what's the markup, right? It might be I buy it for a quarter, sell it for 50, and you sell it for 75 to the dude that sells it for $1. But invariably, it's the people at the center of the network that are actually getting 10, 20, 30, 50% of all the commerce, which is all the energy. Now, and what's the definition of a smuggler or a pirate? The definition of a smuggler is someone that doesn't want to give me half their stuff.
Right.
So how do I stop that? I have to have a navy that goes to kill them. Yeah. So you have the Carthaginian navy stopping smuggling so they can tax half the stuff. And that's why Romans can't. Carthago delenda est, right? Is it like Pliny the Elder or Cato? I forget which one said, in every speech he gave in the Senate for 20 years, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. Why? Because two people can't shake down the same guy of half his stuff. There's nothing left. If I take half your stuff as a tax, I can't, it's like the tax wars.
Yeah.
The Carthaginians are taxing the shippers and the Romans want the money. So therefore, the Romans must defeat the Carthaginians. Now the Romans tax you, then they fall, and the Venetians rise. Now the Venetian navy controls the Med. Then you've got, you ever go to Venice, there's this great Renaissance painting, the Battle of Lepanto. And the Battle of Lepanto is when the King of Spain allies with the Pope from Rome, the head of the Roman Catholic Church, and with the Doge of Venice. And those three navies fight the Turks, the invading Muslims from Istanbul, and they beat them. And it's the triumph of Christendom. But it gets you thinking about why were they all killing each other in the first place over the Med? And you realize it's because they're fighting over control of the mercantile network.
Right.
And then the next interesting observation is, you've heard the word Roman Catholic Church, right? You ever heard the phrase Venetian Catholic?
I don't think so.
There was a time when the Venetians terminated the Catholic Church in Venice. The Catholic Church in the entire Venetian Empire didn't terminate with the Pope in Rome. It terminated with the Doge in Venice. And so that means all tithes, right, all due goes to Venice and stops. You can't have an empire unless the person at the top of the empire is also in control of the religion. Because if you don't control the religion, then someone else takes half your money. You see, it's all about energy flow.
Right.
And the energy is flowing. By the way, the Pontifex Maximus originally refers to the Roman consul, to the head of Rome, right? Augustus Caesar was the Pontifex Maximus. So the Romans had it. Eventually, the high priest.
Right.
So the high priest, the Roman consuls were the high priest of Rome for 700 years. If you're elected general, you're also the priest. You run all the religious ceremonies. They didn't separate those two. And so the church and the mercantile empire and the power to tax migrates from Rome to Venice. Okay. When did Venice start to decline? When they lost control of the church.
Right.
At the end of the day, they start sinking because you can't afford to maintain those buildings. You can't afford to maintain 100-story buildings in Manhattan unless you're at the center of a financial empire.
Right.
I have to basically buy your bonds for 68 cents on the dollar and sell them at 82 cents on the dollar and cut the difference.
Right.
There are a lot of securities on Wall Street where there's only two market makers. There's the one bank and the other bank, and they trade with each other. And if you're buying at the bottom, or you're buying at the top of the spread, and you're selling at the bottom of the spread, and the spread is 2%, Robert. And so if I turn over $1 billion worth of bonds, I'm paying $20 million in commissions, and there's a monopoly there. And the $20 million is just flowing into what? It's flowing into the building, and my buddy works for that bank and I work for this bank, and we drink together and we just kind of joke about the 200 basis point spread.
Interesting. So it's these groups sort of competing to be the head gatekeeper in a way, right? But to preserve that gatekeeping, it's intimately connected to the church control of religion, I guess you might say. So does this somehow connect the actual connections between money and religion? Like even today we have In God We Trust on the U.S. dollar bill, for instance.
It takes us to the Reformation. By the way, if you go to Amsterdam is the city of canals. It's a big if you've ever seen a distribution center, it's the trucks come in one side, it goes through a very complicated set of conveyors, and it goes out the other side. These trucks come from the manufacturers. Those trucks go to the stores or the locales. And this distribution center is a maze of conveyors. Amsterdam's that, but it's that for barges before we had machines. That's what Venice is. That's what every great mercantile, that's what they did in every mercantile center. And when you get to, Martin Luther's time, you realize one of the key drivers is there's no way that we can rise or elevate our civilization if we have to send all of our money to Rome.
Right.
You see this struggle throughout medieval history. William the Conqueror had that struggle. You see the struggle of the Northern European German nobles, and then of course it punctuates itself with Henry VIII, who eventually forms the Anglican Church, so he can be the Pontifex Maximus. And if the church terminates with the King of England, they don't have to ship any money, down to Italy, nor do they have to ask permission to change their alliances and get married and do what they will. It's useful to have God on your side. It's always been useful. Right. And so that drives a lot of stuff throughout the Renaissance, and it drives you can say that Northern Europe broke off from the Roman Catholic Church for religious reasons, or you could say the Northern European powers that be created the religion for political reasons and economic reasons to break off from the Roman Catholic Church. But either way, it's kind of a triumph of history that everybody's forgotten that there used to be lots of, why do they call it Roman Catholic if there weren't other Catholics? How many different branches of the Catholic Church do you think there were? Like 1,000. There could have been a lot. They just kind of coalesced over time. But here's the general principle. Everywhere on earth where you see a big city, it was the center of an empire. Paris, London, Hong Kong, New York, Venice, Rome, everywhere. And by the way, everywhere where you see a city that's fallen upon hard times, that's been destroyed, its empire lapsed. Carthage, Troy, right? You could name them on and on and on, right? Yeah. Venice had an empire, lost an empire. And that's because you can't physically create this kind of economic density. I mean, you go to Paris and you look at the Cathedral of Notre Dame and you look at how much human effort went into creating Notre Dame. There are people that are selling postcards and bottled water in the shadow of Notre Dame Cathedral, making money off of tourists, where the guys inherited the concession from his father's father. And if you go back 10 generations, the concession was 700 years old. Okay, they're living off of the vestiges of an empire long past. And now the question is, what are the empires of the future?